My name is Eleanor Hargrove. I'm 52 years old. I'm a professor. I drive a 7-year-old Subaru, and I grade papers on Sunday mornings. And until 8 months ago, I thought the most valuable thing I owned was a decent pension plan and a shelf full of books nobody else wanted to read. Then my husband of 25 years handed me divorce papers in the front seat of his car. And 3 weeks later, my name showed up on a federal securities filing worth over $600 million. He had no idea. And honestly, neither did I. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments, and please stay with me until the end. I still remember exactly what I was wearing the night my marriage ended. A navy blue dress, the one Callum had bought me for our 20th anniversary. "You look the best in this color, Ellie," he'd said back then, smoothing the fabric at my shoulder with the kind of easy tenderness that made me believe, genuinely believe, that we were going to be okay. That whatever distance had crept between us over the years was just the normal settling of a long marriage. The kind of thing that happens to everyone and means nothing. I wore that dress to the UCSF Medical Gala on the last Friday of March 2025. I wore it because some part of me, the part that still showed up, wanted him to look at me the way he used to. He didn't. The gala was held at the Four Seasons in downtown San Francisco, the kind of event where everyone is impressive and everyone knows it. Surgeons in tailored suits, research directors with name tags that read like a medical textbook, hospital administrators who laughed a little too loudly at each other's jokes. I had been to this event 7 times. I knew the rhythm of it. The cocktail hour small talk, the dinner where Callum would be pulled into conversations I wasn't part of, the awards ceremony where I'd sit straight-backed and smile at the right moments. I was good at the right moments. I'd had a lot of practice. Dr. Callum Whitfield, 55 years old, one of the most respected cardiothoracic surgeons on the West Coast, had a stillness about him that people mistook for wisdom. In the operating room, I'm told, he was extraordinary, calm under pressure, decisive, the kind of person whose hands never shook. That stillness, I eventually understood, extended to things it shouldn't have. They called his name for the award just after 9 o'clock, Surgeon of the Year, for the second time. The room applauded with the genuine enthusiasm of people who meant it. I applauded too, watching him walk to the podium in that unhurried way of his, adjusting the microphone like a man who had given 100 speeches and found them all mildly beneath him. He thanked the selection committee. He thanked his colleagues. He thanked his research team. Pausing slightly, I noticed, on the word team, and he thanked his patients, calling it the privilege of a lifetime. He did not thank me. The year before, he had called me the most patient woman I've ever known. It had gotten a warm laugh from the crowd. I had smiled and felt, I'm embarrassed to admit this now, genuinely proud. This year, nothing. I told myself it meant nothing. People forget things. He was nervous, distracted, tired from a double surgery earlier that week. I had a whole list of reasonable explanations assembled before he'd even stepped off the stage. That's what you do after 25 years. You become very good at reasonable explanations. We didn't speak much during dinner. That wasn't unusual. Callum had a colleague on either side of him and a conversation about robotic surgery systems that clearly mattered more than the salmon. I talked to the woman on my left, a cardiologist named Patricia who had recently adopted a greyhound and had a lot of feelings about it. I liked Patricia. I held on to her greyhound story like a lifeboat through the second half of the evening. On the drive home, Callum was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of two people who had run out of words in a good way. The other kind. The kind that has a shake to it. We pulled into our neighborhood in Pacific Heights just before 11. Our house, a narrow Victorian on a steep block, sat dark except for the porch light I always left on. Callum pulled up to the curb instead of pulling into the garage. That was the first thing that didn't fit. He put the car in park but didn't move to get out. The engine ran on. I had my hand on the door handle. Ellie. His voice was different. Not cold, not angry, calibrated. The voice he used to deliver difficult news. I had heard it exactly once before. When he told me my mother's test results were not what we'd hoped for, I let go of the door handle. I need to say something, he said, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. The street was empty. 2 blocks over, a dog was barking at nothing. Okay, I said, I want a divorce. The dog kept barking. My own heartbeat felt oddly loud. I'm sorry, I said, because my brain had not processed the sentence. What? I want to end the marriage. Same tone. Like he was repeating a diagnosis. I've thought about this for a long time, Ellie. This isn't something I decided overnight. I turned to look at him, his profile in the dark. The same face I had looked at across 1,000 dinners, in the half-light of 100 early mornings, in every ordinary moment that makes up a long life together. Is there someone else? I heard myself ask. He didn't answer immediately. That half-second pause, I will never forget it. It was the most honest thing he said all evening. Her name is Jade, he said. She's someone I work with. A research fellow in my department. How old is she? A pause, 26. 26, I was 52. I had shoes older than the gap between us. She's closer in age to a student of mine than to me, I said quietly. Ellie, how long? He exhaled. About a year, 12 months. Last Thanksgiving when we hosted his sister's family, and I made that complicated pie that took 3 hours. Last Christmas when we drove to Carmel and walked on the beach, and he held my hand and I genuinely thought, this is still good, we're still good. Our anniversary trip to Napa in January, where he'd been quiet, had been grateful for the wine and the view, and told myself quiet was fine. Quiet was just what long marriages looked like. A whole year. He had been living a completely different life inside the same house, and I had been making reasonable explanations for all of it. I see, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, calm, measured, like I was commenting on a student's paper. Callum reached into the back seat and brought out a slim leather portfolio, set it on the console between us. My attorney prepared these. I wanted you to have them tonight so you'd have time to. You already have an attorney. Yes. You already filed. The paperwork is prepared. It hasn't been filed yet. I wanted to talk to you first. I looked at the portfolio. I didn't touch it. That's very considerate of you, I said. If he caught the edge in that, he didn't show it. I'm not trying to make this ugly, Ellie. The terms are fair. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of. Like I was a problem to be managed. Like 25 years of shared life had been quietly reclassified as a liability he was now settling. I picked up the portfolio. I'll read them, I said. My attorney will need a response within. I'll read them, I said again. I got out of the car. I walked up the front steps. I unlocked the door with the key I'd used every foot for 16 years. I stepped inside and closed it behind me without looking back. For a long moment, I stood in the dark hallway with my navy dress and my leather portfolio and the silence of a house that had just become something else. I heard his car pull away from the curb. I sat down on the floor right there, back against the door, and I did not move for a very long time. I thought the worst thing that could happen to a woman was being left. I was wrong. The worst thing is finding out later exactly how long ago she was already gone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed that had been our bed for 16 years, and I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house make its nighttime sounds. The refrigerator cycling on and off, the old pipes in the walls, the faint hum of the city outside. Sounds I had always tuned out because there was another person in the house to make them background noise. That night, they were the whole soundtrack. Around 2 a.m, I went downstairs. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small lamp on the side table in the living room, the one we'd bought at a flea market in Sonoma on our 3rd anniversary, and that Callum had complained about for 22 years, because the shade was slightly crooked. I had never straightened it. I kind of loved the crooked shade. I sat on the couch in the amber half-light, and I looked at the room. 25 years of a life, arranged on shelves and walls and surfaces. His medical texts lined up precisely. Callum had a thing about alphabetical order that I had always teased him about. My own books shoved in wherever they fit, horizontal stacks on top of vertical rows, post-it notes sticking out at odd angles. His framed photographs from conferences and award ceremonies. My collection of small things that had caught my eye over the years. A piece of sea glass in a bowl, a postcard from a student who'd gone to study in Florence, a tiny watercolor of the Golden Gate that a colleague had painted and given me for my 50th birthday. Two people's lives coexisting in the same square footage for so long that I had stopped seeing either one clearly. I sat there until the lamp made my eyes tired. Then I went back to bed and lay in the dark until my alarm went off at 6:30. I called in sick to the university for the first time in 11 years. My department coordinator, Greg, sounded so genuinely alarmed that I almost laughed. Dr. Hargrove, do you need anything? Your Thursday seminar. I'll be back Thursday, I told him. I just need today. I needed more than today. But today was what I asked for. I showered, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the leather portfolio in front of me and opened it. The settlement papers were thorough. I'll give Callum that. He had always been methodical, in medicine and finances, in the way he organized his closet. Everything had a system, a logic, a reason. Watching him plan anything was like watching someone build something carefully from the ground up. Meticulous, unhurried, structurally sound. He had applied that same care to leaving me. The documents were prepared by a firm called Harrington and Voss, one of the most prominent family law practices in San Francisco. 3 years earlier, Callum had reorganized a substantial portion of his income through a private medical LLC called Whitfield Surgical Associates. On paper, a professional services company. In practice, it meant much of what he earned existed inside a business entity rather than as personal income, considerably harder to classify as a marital asset in a divorce. The house in Pacific Heights, mortgaged in both our names, had been paid down primarily through his LLC distributions. His argument, implicit in the paperwork, was that the equity belonged disproportionately to him. His proposed settlement, 18 months of spousal support at a modest monthly figure, 20% of the net equity in the house, and a clean break. For 25 years. For every dinner party where I smiled at his colleagues and asked thoughtful questions about their lives and made sure the conversation never stalled. For every early morning when he left at 5 for a surgery, and I lay awake another hour because the bed felt wrong without him in it. 20% of the house equity in 18 months. I closed the folder. I put both hands flat on the table. He thinks I have nothing, I thought. He has calculated that I have nothing. And the infuriating part, the part I had to sit with in that quiet kitchen, was that he wasn't entirely wrong. I was a tenured professor with a solid salary and a pension that would eventually be adequate. I had no significant savings of my own. For 25 years, our finances had been intertwined the way long marriages do, and Callum had always managed the larger picture. I had never questioned it. Why would I? He was the one with the financial instincts. I trusted him. He thinks I have nothing. I thought briefly about my father, Franklin Hargrove, dead 20 years now, a quiet man who had worked in technology and left me a modest trust that deposited a small amount into my account every month, enough to notice, not enough to matter. The kind of inheritance that said I thought of you without saying I made sure you'd be okay. I wondered what he would have said if he could see me sitting at this table. I finished my cold coffee and went to take a shower. Miriam Okafor arrived at 11:15 with a container of homemade jollof rice, a bottle of Côtes du Rhône, and the expression of a woman who had already decided she was staying for a while. Miriam had been my best friend for 19 years. We had met at a faculty mixer. She was covering a story about research funding cuts at the university for the Chronicle. I was standing alone near the cheese table trying to look like I preferred it that way. And within 20 minutes, we had established that we both thought the event was terrible. The wine was worse. And faculty mixers into general form of institutionalized misery. We had been close ever since. She was a financial journalist now, senior correspondent for a business publication, with the kind of mind that processed information quickly and filed it away precisely and retrieved it at inconvenient moments when you would have preferred not to know things. You look terrible, she said, stepping inside without being fully invited. Good morning to you too. Did you sleep? Some. Ellie, sums. I slept some. I stepped back to let her in. You didn't have to come. Girl, stop. She was already heading toward the kitchen. Where are your bowls? We ate at the kitchen table. Miriam had the social grace to not ask the hard questions until I'd eaten half the bowl, which I appreciated more than I could say. There's something about being handed food by someone who loves you when you haven't been taking care of yourself. It bypasses all your defenses in a way that's almost unfair. Okay, she said when she judged I'd had enough. Tell me. I told her everything: the gala, the car, the portfolio, the LLC, the proposed settlement. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and Miriam listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, her face doing the quiet work of absorbing and sorting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. He lawyered up before he told you, she said. Yes, Harrington and Voss. You know them? I've written about cases they handled. They're not cheap and they're not nice. She picked up her wine glass. He planned this for a while, Ellie. You don't restructure your income through an LLC on a whim. That takes months. I know. How are you doing? Like, actually, I thought about it honestly. I feel like someone rearranged all the furniture in a room I've lived in for 25 years, and now I keep walking into things in the dark. Everything is exactly where it always was and also completely wrong. She nodded slowly. That's a pretty good description of betrayal. Is it betrayal if you should have seen it coming? Oh, absolutely. Betrayal isn't about being blindsided. It's about someone you trusted doing something they knew would hurt you and doing it anyway. She said it simply, like she was stating a fact. The planning makes it worse, not better. He didn't lose his head over some girl. He built a whole exit strategy. We sat with that for a minute. Do you want to know about her? Miriam said. Jade, you already looked her up, didn't you? She had the decency to look slightly apologetic. I'm a journalist, Ellie. It's a reflex. Tell me. I think I had been braced for something that would confirm every insecurity I'd kept quiet over the years. Younger, obviously, more glamorous. The kind of woman who made a 52-year-old professor feel like a category error. Jade Sorensen was 26, completing her PhD in cardiac research at UCSF. She ran an Instagram account called @JadeenMedicine with hundreds of thousands of followers. Not a lifestyle influencer, not fashion or travel, but a science communicator. Short videos explaining complex cardiac procedures in plain language. Smart content, the kind of thing that made cardiology feel interesting to people who had never thought about it. She's actually good at it, Miriam said, with the reluctant fairness of someone who would rather not admit it, like genuinely. Great, I said flatly. I'm just saying, she's not some dummy he picked up at a bar. She's accomplished, which makes it more complicated, not less. I understood what she meant. A young woman chasing a surgeon's status was one kind of story. A young scientist who was brilliant and working directly under his mentorship was another. The second had more room for him to tell himself it was something meaningful. There's something else, Miriam said, her voice shifting. She turned her phone toward me. An Instagram post, one of Jade's from about 3 months ago. A photo taken at what looked like a medical conference. In the background, slightly blurred, a man in a dark suit stood with his back to the camera. I recognized the suit. I had ironed that suit. The caption read, "Grateful for mentors who push you to think bigger. The best lessons don't come from textbooks." The post was dated January 18th. January 18th. I scrolled back in my memory. That was the Friday before our anniversary trip to Napa. Callum had come home late that evening, said traffic on 101 had been bad. He'd been quiet at dinner, the first dinner of the trip, and I'd put it down to a long week. 3 months ago, I said. Yeah, he took me to Napa for our anniversary 3 months ago. I know. I set the phone face down on the table. We didn't say anything for a while. You know what the worst part is? I said eventually. Not that he was with her, not even that he lied. It's that I was so grateful for that trip. I thought it meant something. I thought he was trying. Miriam reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. Sometimes the best thing a friend can do is just put her hand over yours and stay. 10 days later, on a gray Tuesday afternoon when the fog had come in thick off the bay, I started going through the storage room. I don't know exactly what made me start that particular day. Partly practical. I was going to have to leave the house eventually, and the storage room was full of years of accumulated things I needed to sort through. But also, I think, I needed something to do with my hands. I had been inside my own head for 10 days, and it was getting crowded in there. The storage room was off the hallway near the back of the house, a walk-in closet that had gradually become a repository for everything without another place. Holiday decorations, Callum's old golf clubs he hadn't touched in 6 years, a box of college textbooks I'd kept for reasons I couldn't articulate, and in the far corner, partly hidden behind the luggage, 3 cardboard boxes sealed with packing tape, each labeled in my own handwriting. Dad, books. Dad, office. Dad, 2005. I had packed these boxes after my father died 20 years ago. I had moved them from his house in San Jose to our first apartment, then to the house we'd rented before this one, then here. 3 moves over 20 years, and I had never once opened them. I worked through the first 2 boxes slowly. Books, files, old day planners, the ordinary administrative residue of a working life. Then I opened Dad, 2005. Near the bottom, under a folded newspaper and an address book, my hand found a manila envelope. It was sealed. On the front, in my father's handwriting, for Eleanor. From Dad, please read this when you're alone and have time to think. I stared at it. The storage room was very quiet. Through the small high window, I could see fog pressing against the glass. Inside were 2 things. The first was a set of legal documents, dense with terminology I didn't immediately understand. But I saw my name. I saw the words on Hargrove Technologies, LLC. I saw beneficial interest and transferred in perpetuity to Eleanor Ann Hargrove. And I saw numbers, many of them. With many digits, I read the first one 3 times before I accepted I was reading it correctly. The second thing was a letter, handwritten, 2 pages, in my father's careful small script. I set the documents aside and I read, Eleanor, if you're reading this, then either something has gone wrong in your life or you finally got around to cleaning out that storage room, knowing you, probably both at once. I laughed out loud at that. It was so completely him. I have a lot to explain. I'll try to do it plainly because I think you deserve plain. When you were small, I started a software company with 2 friends. You probably remember me mentioning Hargrove Technology Partners. I told you the company struggled. That was partly true and partly not. In 1995, a larger company approached us about an acquisition. We sold the majority of the business, but I kept 18% of the company's equity through a trust I set up with my attorney, Theodore Ashby. I put it in your name. I want to explain why I never told you. I have watched what money does to people, Ellie. Not bad people, good people who loved each other, and then had something large and complicated enter their lives, and found that the love wasn't strong enough to hold its shape under the pressure. I didn't want that for you. But I also know the world, and I know that sometimes the people who seem to choose you are choosing something else. I wanted to make sure that if that ever happened, if you ever found yourself standing in a place where the ground had shifted, you would have something solid under your feet that no one could take from you. The trust is yours, Eleanor. It has always been yours. Theodore Ashby will explain everything. His number is with these documents. There is a second letter in this envelope. You'll find it at the back. Don't open it unless you're angry at me, and if you are, that's okay. I think I earned it. I love you more than I ever quite knew how to say. Daddy sat on the floor of that storage room until the light through the window changed. Then I pulled out my phone. The number was written at the bottom of the letter in my father's handwriting. I dialed. It rang 3 times. Ashby Estate and Trust Law, said a woman's voice. How can I help you? My name is Eleanor Hargrove, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. I believe Theodore Ashby has been expecting my call. For about 20 years. A pause. One moment, Miss Hargrove. I'll put you right through. I had spent 20 years believing my father left me a modest cushion and a box of books I never opened. I was about to find out the box had been holding everything. I met Theodore Ashby the following morning. I had barely slept, not from grief this time, but from something I hadn't felt in months. Curiosity. A restless, urgent need to understand what I was holding. His office was not what I expected. I think some part of me had imagined something proportional to the numbers in those documents. Marble floors, aggressive quiet, the architectural equivalent of money clearing its throat. What I found instead was a modest suite on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district. Clean, professional, completely unpretentious. The receptionist offered me coffee with the manner of someone who actually meant it. Theodore Ashby himself was 68 years old, silver-haired, with the careful, unhurried manner of a man who had learned long ago that rushing things was how you missed them. He stood when I came in, shook my hand firmly, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Miss Hargrove," he said, "I'm very glad you called." "You've been waiting a while," I said. "I have." He said it without reproach. "I tried to reach you twice. Once in 2008, once in 2019. The 2008 letter, I remembered it now, vaguely. An envelope from a law firm that I'd assumed was routine estate administration, something already resolved. I had been in the middle of a particularly grueling semester, and it had gotten shuffled into a pile and lost. The 2019 call, October, I thought, deep in revisions for my third book, 3 weeks from deadline. A call from an unknown number during a working afternoon had not made the cut. 20 years of a different life lost to a busy semester and a book deadline. "I owe you an apology for that," I said. Theodore waved it off gently. "Your father anticipated the possibility. He left instructions for exactly this circumstance." A small smile. He was a very thorough man. He really was. My father, Franklin Hargrove, had founded Hargrove Technology Partners in San Jose in 1987, a small enterprise software company with 8 employees. I had vague childhood memories of hearing the name, something my father mentioned occasionally at dinner without much detail. "Your father told you the company struggled," Theodore said. "He did. I assumed it had more or less failed. That's what he told most people." He removed a document from the folder, a purchase agreement dated 1995. In reality, by the early 90s, the company had become quite valuable. A technology conglomerate called Meridian Group approached your father about an acquisition in 1994. He sold it. He sold 78%. Your father retained 18% through a trust, quietly, with no public announcement. Meridian preferred discretion. Your father had no objection. Why didn't he tell me? He addressed that directly in the instructions he left me. Theodore's expression was careful. He said he had watched money change people's relationships to their lives and to those around them in ways he found deeply troubling. He wanted you to build your career, your choices, your marriage on foundations that were independent of financial inheritance. I thought about Oxford. The research fellowship I had turned down in 2003 because Callum had just accepted the position at UCSF, and I hadn't wanted to be the thing that complicated it. I had framed it to myself as a choice freely made. I thought about how that felt now. He was trying to protect me, I said. Yes, and he was protecting the integrity of the relationships in your life. A pause, particularly your marriage. He didn't trust Callum. I think concern is more accurate than distrust. Your father was a careful observer of people. He had concerns, but he also believed in letting people demonstrate who they were over time, rather than making premature judgments. I looked down at the 1995 acquisition agreement. My father's signature at the bottom, the same deliberate handwriting from birthday cards, and the letter I'd found in the storage room. "What happened to the 18%?" I asked. Theodore placed another document on the desk. Meridian Group was itself acquired in 2003 by a larger technology holding company called Vantage Pacific. Hargrove Technology Partners was reorganized and rebranded, but your father's 18% equity stake transferred with each acquisition, proportionally adjusted. It has remained intact and has appreciated significantly over 30 years. He slid a financial summary across the desk. Recent, dated February 2025. I looked at the number, $340 million. I read it again. "That's," I started. "Current estimated value," Theodore said, "based on private valuation, which brings me to the second thing I need to tell you." Theodore folded his hands on the desk. "Vantage Pacific has been preparing for an initial public offering for the past 14 months, he said. The process is well advanced. The registration statement, a document filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission that initiates the public offering, and which anyone can read online, is expected to be submitted within the next 8 to 10 weeks. My name will be in it," I said. As a principal shareholder holding approximately 18% of a company going public, yes. Your name, your ownership stake, the associated financial figures, all part of the public record. And the valuation at the offering is projected to be significantly higher than the current private estimate. He placed one more document in front of me, a summary from the trust's financial advisors. Depending on market conditions, your 18% stake could be valued at between $600 million and $800 million. The room was very quiet. Outside Theodore's window, San Francisco went about its Tuesday. Cars on the street 14 floors below, the Bay Bridge visible in the distance, cables catching the afternoon light, $600 to $800 million. I need a moment, I said. Of course. I sat back. I looked at the ceiling, a perfectly ordinary office ceiling with recessed lighting, and had the slightly absurd thought that ceilings looked the same regardless of what was being discussed beneath them. My husband, I said slowly. My soon-to-be ex-husband, he doesn't know about any of this. No one outside this office and the trust's management knows, Theodore said. Your father was extremely careful about confidentiality. But when the filing becomes public, anyone with internet access will be able to see your name and your stake. Theodore nodded. Yes, I thought about Callum, about the leather portfolio on my kitchen table, about 18 months of spousal support and 20% of the house equity, and my attorney will need your response within 2 weeks. He filed for divorce before this became public, I said. Yes. If he had waited, the picture would have looked very different. Theodore paused carefully. Though I want to be clear, the trust was established before your marriage. Under California law, property acquired before marriage is considered separate property. Doctor. Whitfield would not have had a legal claim to the trust assets regardless of when the divorce occurred. So even if he'd known, he could not have claimed the trust directly. A measured pause. However, knowledge of your financial position might have influenced his approach to the settlement negotiations considerably. You mean he might not have lowballed me quite so aggressively? That would be my assessment, yes. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the shape of the irony. Callum had spent months building an exit strategy around his assessment of my financial helplessness. He had been meticulous, strategic, careful. He had done everything right by his own logic. And the one thing he hadn't accounted for was a cardboard box in a storage room I'd been avoiding for 20 years. There's someone else I'd like you to meet, Theodore said. He made a call, and 10 minutes later, a man arrived from an office 2 floors up in the same building. Daniel Price was 51 direct, with the slightly weathered look of someone who had spent more time in meetings than he'd planned when he was young. He had been managing Hargrove Technology Partners' interests within Vanch Pacific for 15 years, appointed by Theodore as the trust's operating representative after Franklin died. He shook my hand and sat down and looked at me with an expression that was hard to read, part professional assessment, part something more personal. Your father talked about you, he said, quite a bit toward the end. What did he say? He said you were the most genuinely curious person he'd ever known, that you could find something worth paying attention to in almost anything. A pause. He said he hoped the money wouldn't change that. I looked down at my hands. I'm going to need some time to process all of this. That's completely reasonable. The filing will happen in roughly 8 to 10 weeks. That's the next significant event. Until then, nothing changes. What happens after the offering? What does owning 18% of a public company actually mean for my daily life? Daniel leaned forward slightly. It means you'll have a seat on the board if you want it. It means you'll have resources to direct toward things you care about, if and when you choose. It also means a certain amount of public attention you may not be fully prepared for. Because of the divorce, I said. He didn't sugarcoat it. A woman who inherits a significant stake in a company going public, whose divorce becomes final shortly before that happens. Yes, that's a story that will interest people. I thought about Miriam. She was going to have a lot of thoughts about this. Can I ask you something? I said to Theodore, of course. Did my father really think this would happen? That my marriage would end? Theodore was quiet for a moment. I think your father was a man who hoped for the best and prepared for every other possibility. He reached into the folder and removed a smaller envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with my name on the front in my father's handwriting. Below my name, for Ellie, only if she's angry at me. I stared at it. He left 2 letters, Theodore said, the one you found in the box and this one. He asked me to give you this one in person. I took the envelope. He knew I'd be angry. He said, and I'm quoting him, Ellie will understand the why eventually, but first she'll be furious, and she'll have every right to be. A gentle smile. He knew you well. I turned the envelope over in my hands. I'm not ready to open this one yet. It'll keep, Theodore said. It's kept this long. I drove home from Theodore's office in the kind of daze that isn't exactly shock, more like the feeling of walking out of a very long film and finding that the world outside continued to exist, completely indifferent to what you'd just experienced. The city looked exactly the same, the late afternoon light on the bay, people walking dogs, carrying groceries, waiting for buses. The ordinary business of lives that had no idea what had just been handed to a 52-year-old art history professor in a building on California Street. I parked in the faculty lot at the university and sat in my car for a while, looking at the building where I'd spent 20 years doing work I genuinely loved. I thought about my father sitting in a lawyer's office in 1999, the year before our wedding, carefully constructing a financial structure around a daughter whose marriage he was already uncertain about, trying to protect something he couldn't name directly. I thought about Oxford. Callum and I had been married 3 years when I was offered the visiting fellowship at the Ruskin School. We had sat at the kitchen table of our small apartment in the Mission District for 2 evenings and talked it through. Callum had been careful not to say directly that he needed me to stay. He was too smart for that. Instead, he had talked about logistics, the timing, the distance, the difficulty of starting a new position while your partner was on another continent, the strain on a young marriage. He hadn't said, don't go. He'd just laid out all the reasons why going would be complicated, and I had decided not to go. Sitting in my faculty parking lot 22 years later, I thought about the woman who had made that choice. 30 years old, 3 years married, already in the habit of reading Callum's discomfort as information about what she should do, and I felt something for her that was close to grief. She had been so careful not to want too much. My phone buzzed. Miriam, you okay? Haven't heard from you today, I typed back. I'm okay. I have a lot to tell you. Can you come over tonight? Her response was immediate. Already on my way. Should I bring wine or something stronger? Both, I sent back. That evening, after Miriam had listened to the entire story, with the focused attention of a woman professionally trained to absorb large amounts of information quickly, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Girl, I know. No, Ellie. Girl, I know. $600 to $800 million. Approximately, depending on market conditions. Miriam picked up her wine glass and put it down again without drinking, which for Miriam was a significant indicator. And Callum has no idea. No one does. Not until the filing goes public. And when it does, I thought about the leather portfolio, the settlement terms, the way he had said you'll be taken care of like the matter was already settled. Then he'll find out the same way everyone else does, I said, by reading it. Miriam looked at me steadily. Then she picked up her wine glass. Your dad, she said, was a very smart man. He really was, I said. We sat in the kitchen of the house that was no longer mine, and outside the fog rolled in off the bay the way it always did, unhurried and inevitable, the way certain truths eventually find their way to the surface no matter how long you've managed to keep them under. My father's second letter sat in my bag, still sealed. I wasn't ready yet, but I was getting there. He had built something extraordinary and put it in my name and waited 20 years for me to find it. What I didn't know yet was how much finding it was going to cost the man who thought he'd already calculated everything. The 8 weeks between my meeting with Theodore and the filing of the S1 were the strangest of my life. On the surface, nothing dramatic happened. I went back to work. I taught my Tuesday and Thursday seminars, 20th century American art, a subject I had spent 20 years learning to love and had somehow managed to love more each year rather than less. I held office hours. I graded papers. I attended a faculty meeting about curriculum restructuring that lasted 2.5 hours and resolved nothing, which was entirely consistent with the history of such meetings. I did all the ordinary things, and underneath them, like a current running below still water, was the knowledge of what was coming. Callum's attorney had sent 2 follow-up emails requesting my response to the settlement proposal. I had forwarded both to a family law attorney named Sandra Reeves, whom Miriam had recommended with the particular endorsement she reserved for people she considered genuinely excellent. She's the kind of lawyer who makes the other side nervous just by showing up. Sandra reviewed Callum's proposed terms and confirmed what I already suspected. Even without your inheritance situation, she told me in our first meeting, the proposed alimony is low for a 25 marriage in California, and his characterization of the house equity is legally contestable. He's betting you don't have the resources or the appetite to push back. He would have been right 3 months ago, I said. Sandra looked at me over her reading glasses. Well, he's not right now. We did not tip our hand. Sandra communicated professionally with Callum's attorneys, requesting extensions and additional documentation, standard procedural moves that signaled engagement without revealing strategy. Callum's team, apparently confident, complied without urgency. He had no idea. Meanwhile, I opened my father's second letter. Not immediately. I sat with it for almost 2 weeks. It lived in the top drawer of my desk, and occasionally I would open the drawer and look at it and close it again. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Some internal readiness, some sense that I had processed enough to have room for what was inside. I opened it on a Sunday morning in late April, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, the early fog still thick outside the windows. The letter was 1 page, his handwriting slightly less precise than the first. Written later, I thought, when his hands had started to show his age. Ellie, so you're angry. Good. You should be. Here's what I want to say about that. You're right that I should have told you, not about the money. I stand by that decision. But I should have told you that I saw you. I watched you make yourself smaller to fit inside that marriage, and I said nothing. And that was a failure of fatherhood that I'll carry. I told myself I was respecting your choices. The truth is I was afraid that if I said something, you'd hear it as an attack on Callum, and you'd defend him, and it would push you further away from me. I chose my relationship with you over your well-being, and I dressed it up as respect for your autonomy. That was wrong. I was a coward about it. I want you to know one other thing. The 18% was never just a gift. It was an apology, paid in advance, for all the times I saw you shrink and said nothing. You were never too much, Ellie. You were exactly enough. The people who made you feel otherwise were working with a deficit I couldn't fix for you. But I could make sure you had a floor to stand on. Stand on it. All my love. Daddy folded the letter and held it for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the fog was thinning. The first suggestion of the bay visible through the gray, like a promise that the day intended to become itself eventually. I thought about the word coward, my father applying it to himself plainly, without hedging. The same man who had built a company from nothing, who had structured a 20-year protection for a daughter he worried about, calling himself a coward because he had stayed quiet when he should have spoken. The honesty of it undid me in a way the first letter hadn't. I sat at the kitchen table and I cried properly for the first time since the night Callum drove away from the curb. Not for my marriage, not for the 25 years, not even for Oxford, but for my father, who had been gone for 20 years and had still found a way to tell me the truth. I cried for a while, then I washed my face and made more coffee. Stand on it. Okay, Dad, okay. It was a Tuesday when the filing went public. I was in the middle of my 11 o'clock seminar. We were discussing Edward Hopper, specifically Nighthawks, and I was making a point about urban loneliness as a compositional choice, when my phone, face down on the lectern, began to vibrate. Once, twice, 3 times, then again. I ignored it. I kept talking about Hopper. I talked about the diner counter that extends beyond the frame, the way he uses architecture to create emotional distance. My students were engaged, the kind of alert quality that meant people were actually thinking. My phone vibrated 4 more times. I made it to the end of the lecture. We'll pick up Thursday with Rothko, I said, closing my notes. Think about the relationship between scale and emotional impact, specifically whether a painting can be too large for genuine intimacy. The room emptied. I picked up my phone, 14 missed calls, 11 text messages. Miriam had called 4 times. Her first text sent 40 minutes earlier, Ellie, the filing just went public. Call me right now. 3 minutes later, okay, I'm going to need you to call me like immediately, then, apparently sent while I was talking about Hopper. Bloomberg just picked it up. You're on the front page of the financial section. Front page Ellie pulled up the filing on my phone and navigated to the principal shareholders section. Eleanor Ann Hargrove, 18, 3% beneficial ownership through the Hargrove Family Trust. My name, on a public document, filed with the federal government, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. I sat down on the edge of the seminar table. My phone buzzed. The name on the screen was not Miriam, Callum Whitfield. I let it ring. I listened to my own breathing. I looked at the empty chairs where 22 students had been sitting 15 minutes ago, with no idea what their professor was standing at the edge of. The call went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, he called again. I picked up. Eleanor. His voice was different. I had heard Callum in many registers over 25 years, calm, focused, occasionally tender, more occasionally dismissive, but I had never heard him sound like this. The careful composure that was as natural to him as breathing, simply absent. Hello, Callum. I'm looking at a filing, Vantage Pacific. Yes, your name is on it. Yes, a pause. Eleanor, what is this? How long have you known? A few weeks. The silence had a texture to it. I could almost hear him processing. The same focused intelligence he brought to a complex surgical problem, now applied to the sudden collapse of his own assumptions. A few weeks, he repeated. I found documents in my father's papers. I met with his attorney. I've been trying to understand it all, and you didn't tell me. I let that sit for a moment. Callum, you handed me divorce papers in your car. You had already retained one of the most aggressive family law firms in San Francisco. You had spent a year restructuring your income to minimize what I could claim. A pause. At what point in that sequence was I supposed to bring this up? Nothing. You calculated everything, I said. You were very thorough. I just wasn't the variable you thought I was. This changes things. The composure was coming back now. The professional kind, the problem-solving voice. We need to talk about the settlement. My attorney will be in touch with your attorney. That's how this works. Eleanor, I have a class to prepare for, I said. I ended the call. I sat in the empty seminar room for a few minutes. Nighthawks was still on the screen, the diner, the figures inside it, the dark street pressing against the glass, all that light and all that distance. Then I called Miriam back. She picked up on the first ring. Are you okay? She said immediately. I'm okay. Financial Times picked it up too. Some of them have connected the divorce filing, Ellie. Your name is trending. I don't have a financial Twitter. You don't need one. Other people are doing it for you. A pause. What do you need right now? I need to teach my Thursday class and not think about any of this for 48 hours. That's not going to be possible. I know, but it's what I need. Sandra Reeves called me that evening. I heard from Harrington and Voss this afternoon, she said, with the tone of someone who had expected a call and found it right on schedule. They're requesting an immediate pause on all settlement proceedings, pending in a financial circumstances review. What does that mean? It means Callum wants to reopen the negotiations now that he knows about the trust. Sandra's voice was measured. Their argument will be that you failed to disclose a significant asset during the discovery process. I found out about the asset during the discovery process. I know, and that's precisely why their argument doesn't hold up. A pause. Eleanor, I want to be direct with you. Callum's attorneys are going to make noise. They're going to file motions designed to make this feel more threatening than it actually is. That's what they do. They create pressure and hope the other side folds. I'm not folding. Good. I could hear a smile in her voice. Because the law is straightforwardly on your side. The trust was established before your marriage. It's your separate property. Period. He's going to argue I hid it. He's going to try. But here's the problem. You didn't know about it. We have documentation of when you first contacted Theodore Ashby's office. We have 20 years of trust activity, showing no involvement from you whatsoever. A pause. And here's the piece I particularly like. In 2017, Callum filed a personal loan application to purchase a property at Lake Tahoe. In that application, under the section for spouses' assets, he wrote 3 words, not applicable, separate, signed under penalty of perjury. I sat very still. He argued himself into a corner, I said, with his own signature. 8 years ago, Sandra confirmed. Yes. 3 days after the filing went public, before the legal noise had really started, in the brief quiet between the headline and the courtroom, I found an email in my university inbox from an address I didn't recognize. A personal account, not a UCSF address. The subject line was blank. I almost deleted it. But something made me open it. Miss Hargrove, my name is Jade Sorensen. I don't expect you to want to hear from me, and I'll understand completely if you don't respond. But I've been sitting with something and I think you should know it. And the only honest thing to do is tell you directly. I ended my relationship with Callum 6 weeks ago, not because of the news about your inheritance. I want to be clear about that. I ended it because of something I found out that made me understand I had been lied to in ways that mattered. When Callum first approached me, and I want to be honest, he told me that his marriage had been over in every meaningful sense for years, that the two of you had been living essentially as roommates, that there was no emotional connection left, that he had stayed out of obligation. He described it as something that had ended long before he met me. I believed him. What I found out 6 weeks ago, when a colleague forwarded me a message she'd accidentally received that was intended for someone else, is that Callum had been having a parallel correspondence with another woman in his department for the past 8 months, a woman who appears to have been told something very similar to what I was told. I was not the first, and I was apparently not the last. I don't know if this changes anything practical for you, but I thought you should know that the story Callum told about your marriage, that it was hollow, that you were both just going through the motions. I don't believe that story anymore. I think it was a narrative he constructed to make what he was doing feel justified. I'm sorry for my part in this. I know that doesn't fix anything. Jade Sorensoni read the email twice. Then I got up and walked to the window of my office, looking out at the quad where students moved across the grass in the afternoon sun. Callum had been running parallel narratives, not just one, multiple. Each woman told a version of the same story. The marriage was already over. She was the real connection. What he was doing was honest, because the alternative was worse. He was not a man who had fallen for someone and made a terrible choice. He was a man who had constructed a system. I thought about the composure that had always been his most characteristic quality. The stillness, the way nothing seemed to throw him. I understood now why nothing threw him. When you're running a careful system, you're not really feeling any of it. I went back to my desk and wrote back to Jade. Thank you for telling me. I mean that genuinely. It took honesty to write that email, and I don't take it for granted. I don't blame you for what happened. You were lied to. That's on him, not you. I hope your research goes well. Your science communication is genuinely excellent. Don't let any of this stop you from doing it. Eleanor Hargrove. I hit send before I could second guess it. 3 weeks later, we were in a courtroom. Not a dramatic wood-paneled courtroom, a small hearing room in the San Francisco Superior Court Family Division, with fluorescent lighting and the atmosphere of a place where difficult things happen routinely, and no one has time to make them feel significant. Callum sat at one table with 2 attorneys from Harrington and Voss. I sat at the other with Sandra. We had not spoken directly since the phone call. We did not speak now. He looked tired, the kind that accumulates when things aren't going the way you planned. Callum's lead attorney, a senior partner named Jeffrey Marsh, with the bearing of a man accustomed to winning, presented their argument methodically. 25 years of marriage, a trust valued at over $600 million, a wife who was, he implied, either aware of the asset and concealed it, or negligently unaware of her own finances in ways that compromised the proceedings. It was well constructed. I sat through it and felt Sandra beside me, radiating the calm of a person who knows exactly what's coming. When it was Sandra's turn, she stood up and did three things. First, she entered into evidence the trust establishment documents dated June 1999, 13 months before the Whitfield-Hargrove marriage. Separate property under California law, no further argument required. Second, she entered the records from Theodore Ashby's office, documenting the two failed contact attempts in 2008 and 2019, consistent with a person who had no knowledge of the trust's significance. Third, and here was the document that had made me laugh out loud in Sandra's office the week before, with a laugh that was equal parts genuine amusement and exhausted disbelief. She entered Callum's personal loan application from 2017 for the Lake Tahoe property. Page 3, under spouse's assets. 3 words in his own handwriting, signed under penalty of perjury. Not applicable, separate, doctor. Whitfield's own sworn financial disclosure from 2017, Sandra said to the judge, with the quiet confidence of someone placing the last piece of a puzzle, reflects his own characterization of his wife's finances as entirely separate from his. He cannot now claim that those same separate finances should have been disclosed as joint marital assets. The room was quiet for a moment. The judge looked at the document, then at Callum's attorneys, then back at the document. Counsel, she said to Harrington and Voss, I'm going to need you to explain to me how your client's own sworn statement is not dispositive on this question. The explanation they offered was not, in anyone's assessment, particularly persuasive. The motion was denied. We walked out into a corridor that smelled of institutional coffee and old carpet. Sandra said quietly, That's done, in the tone of someone checking an item off a list. Callum stood 20 feet away with his attorneys, who were speaking to him in low, careful tones. His face was controlled, but his hands at his sides were not quite still. He looked up and saw me looking at him. Then he said something to his attorneys, walked over, and stopped a few feet away. That 2017 document, he said quietly. I didn't think about it. I know, I said. I was just filling out a loan application. I know, Callum, you were just telling the truth about how you saw our finances, and it turned out to be the truth that mattered. He looked at me for a moment. You're not enjoying this. No, I said, I'm really not. I thought that you would be. I don't want to win anything. I just want it to be over. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite regret, not yet, but the preliminary movement toward it. My attorneys are going to recommend I accept a revised settlement, he said. That would be sensible. Yeah. A pause, I know. He went back to his attorneys. I went with Sandra toward the elevator. That's the first time I've seen Harrington and Voss not have an answer for something, Sandra said when we were out of earshot. I'm going to remember this one. The elevator arrived. We stepped in. The doors closed. Outside, San Francisco was having one of its rare perfect days, the kind where the fog stays out past the gate and the city gets an unobstructed sky. Everything sharp and clear and blue. I stood in the elevator and thought about my father sitting in a lawyer's office in 1999, carefully signing documents, protecting something he couldn't say out loud. Stand on it. I was standing on it. The man who thought he had calculated everything had signed his own miscalculation into a federal document in 2017 and never thought about it again. My father, who had been gone for 20 years, had just walked into a courtroom and won a case. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday morning in June, not the dramatic, cathartic moment you might imagine after everything that had preceded it. The hearing lasted 23 minutes. The judge reviewed the revised settlement agreement, negotiated in the 2 weeks following the failed motion, with Callum's attorneys considerably less aggressive than before, asked a small number of procedural questions, and signed the final dissolution order. 25 years of marriage concluded between 9:47 and 10:10 in the morning. I wore a gray blazer, the expression I had learned to maintain in faculty meetings, where something genuinely upsetting was being discussed and showing it would be counterproductive. Sandra sat beside me. Callum sat at the other table in a dark suit, his posture precisely what it always was, straight, contained, giving nothing away. Jeffrey Marsh sat beside him with the slightly diminished energy of someone working a case that had not gone according to plan. The revised settlement was substantially different from what Callum had originally proposed. Spousal support recalculated appropriately for the length and nature of the marriage. The house equity divided equitably. A clean separation of all other assets, clearly delineated. Nothing that touched the Hargrove Trust, that had never been legally on the table. And after the hearing, Jeffrey Marsh had apparently advised his client to stop attempting to make it so. Sandra had described the final terms as fair, which is all we were ever asking for. When the judge signed the order, I felt the sensation of something heavy being set down. Not joy, not triumph. Just the absence of a weight I had been carrying for months without fully registering how much it was costing me. We filed out into the corridor. Sandra shook my hand warmly. It's done. Go do something good today. Callum passed me without stopping. Then, a few steps past, he did stop, his back to me for a moment, a hesitation that was brief but deliberate. He turned around. I hope things go well for you, he said. His voice was even, the voice he used with people he respected but didn't know well, which I realized was probably the most honest register available to us now. Take care of yourself, Callum, I said. He nodded once and walked away. I watched him go, the familiar set of his shoulders, the unhurried walk, the way he moved through a space like someone who expected it to accommodate him. 25 years of watching that walk. I knew it as well as I knew my own handwriting. I didn't feel sad exactly. I felt the way you feel when a very long book ends. Not grief that it's over, but the strange dislocation of a story that was so much of your life suddenly having a last page. I took the elevator down to the lobby and stepped outside. The city was brilliant, one of those San Francisco days that arrives without warning and makes you understand why people stay. The sky, a particular shade of blue that seems almost too vivid to be real, the light on the bay turning the water to hammered metal. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and just breathed it. My phone buzzed. Miriam, well, I typed back, it's done. Her response came in 3 seconds. Meet me for lunch. I'm buying. Actually, you're buying. I'm buying anyway. I smiled and started walking. I want to be honest about what happened to Callum, because I think honesty requires not making it into something it wasn't. He was not destroyed. He did not lose everything in some tidy reversal that would have felt satisfying in a film, but would have been false in a life. What happened was more like this: the natural costs of being a certain kind of person in a world that eventually notices. The UCSF Academic Affairs Committee completed their review in July, 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The finding was what most people who understood the situation had expected: a violation of the university's policy prohibiting romantic relationships between faculty and graduate students under their direct supervision. The policy existed for good reasons that had nothing to do with the personalities of the specific people involved. The consequence: Callum was removed from his graduate research supervision responsibilities for 2 years. He retained his clinical position, his surgical privileges, his salary. He continued to operate, to do the work he was genuinely extraordinary at, the work that saved lives in ways that were real and not diminished by his personal failures. But in the academic community where much of his identity resided, his standing was quietly, permanently altered. People knew. In professional communities, people always know, even when nothing is said directly. The invitations to speak shifted. The committee appointments thinned. The warmth colleagues extend to someone whose reputation is intact was replaced by something more careful. He didn't talk about it. That was consistent with who he was. I heard about the committee finding through a mutual colleague who mentioned it with the uncomfortable casualness people use when they're not sure how much they should be telling you. I thanked him for letting me know and didn't ask any follow-up questions. What I felt was complicated. Not satisfaction, I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something closer to a quiet recognition. Actions have costs. Not always the costs people expect, not always immediately, not always visibly, but costs nonetheless. That was not justice in any grand sense. It was just the ordinary calculus of a life. 2 months after the divorce, Sandra Reeves called. This is a courtesy call, she said. I think you should know before it becomes more public. Know what? Jeffrey Marsh filed a complaint with the California State Bar last week. against an attorney at another firm who had apparently advised Callum informally on the LLC restructuring 3 years ago. The informal advice may have crossed lines regarding the intent to minimize discoverable assets in anticipation of divorce proceedings. Is that illegal? It's a bar ethics violation if proven. The complaint has been filed. A pause. I'm not telling you this as a victory. I'm telling you because Callum himself apparently provided the information that led to the complaint as part of an attempt to demonstrate good faith cooperation with the court. I sat very still. He turned in his own attorney, his former informal advisor. Yes, that's not nothing, I said slowly. No, Sandra agreed. It isn't. People were complicated. That was the thing about them. Even the ones who hurt you badly enough to leave a permanent mark, they were complicated. And occasionally they did something that didn't fit simple story. And you had to make room for that, even when it was inconvenient. I thanked Sandra and went to teach my 12 o'clock class. 6 weeks after I'd responded to Jade's first email, a second one arrived. Shorter this time. Miss Hargrove, thank you for writing back. I didn't expect that. I transferred to a program at Johns Hopkins in September. Fresh start, different coast, different focus. I'm working on something I'm genuinely excited about for the first time in a while. I also wanted to tell you I watched your talk at the Bay Area Arts Education Symposium last month. Someone posted it online. The part where you talked about what it means to teach someone to really look at something, not just see it. I've been thinking about that ever since. I think I spent 2 years not really looking at what was in front of me. I'm trying to do better at that. Take care of yourself. JD wrote back, Johns Hopkins has an extraordinary cardiac research program. I'm glad you landed somewhere good. And for what it's worth, learning to look properly at things is a lifelong project. I'm 52 and still working on it. Good luck with everything. I mean it. The IPO closed in late September. The final offering price put my 18% stake at approximately $680 million. The number was reported in the financial press with the relish that business journalism reserves for stories with a human element. Several pieces were quite good. One was embarrassingly overwrought. I declined all interview requests for the first 2 months and then gave one careful conversation to a technology publication I trusted to be accurate, which they were. In October, 6 weeks after the IPO closed, Daniel Price called with something that had nothing to do with market performance. There's a matter related to the trust I need to walk you through, he said. Can you come in tomorrow? Daniel was waiting in the conference room with a single folder, thinner than the ones I'd seen at Theodore's office. He slid it across the table. When your father established the trust in 1999, he said, he included a secondary allocation. A small one, 2% of the total equity, set aside separately from your 18%. Who does the 2% belong to? A woman named Ruth Calloway, a pause. Does that name mean anything to you? I turned it over in my mind. Ruth Calloway. And then, slowly, from a very great distance, the way a memory surfaces when you weren't looking for it, something came back. 3rd grade. A classroom in San Jose with low windows and the smell of tempera paint. A woman with gray-streaked hair and paint-stained fingers who had looked at a drawing I'd done of our backyard and said, with a matter-of-factness that carried more weight than enthusiasm would have, "You see things, Eleanor. That's rarer than you think." Mrs. Calloway, my 3rd grade art teacher. She was my teacher, I said, when I was 8 years old. Daniel nodded. Your father wrote a note in his instructions regarding this allocation. He said, I'm reading directly. Ruth Calloway wrote me a letter in the spring of 1981 when Eleanor was in her class. She said Eleanor had a gift for looking at the world clearly and that I should make sure she had every opportunity to develop it. She was right. I never forgot it. She should know she changed something. I stared at the folder. Mrs. Calloway passed away in 2018, Daniel continued gently. But she has 2 children, a son in Portland and a daughter in Atlanta. They are the current beneficiaries of the 2% allocation. They have no idea it exists. I looked out the conference room window. San Francisco Bay in October, gray and silver and quietly beautiful. My father had remembered a letter from a 3rd grade teacher for 40 years. He had quietly set aside a portion of his life's work for her because she had once taken the time to see something in his daughter and tell him about it. He had never forgotten. How do I reach them? I asked. Daniel slid a second sent page across the table. Theodore has already made initial contact. They'd like to speak with you if you're open to it. I'm open to it, I said. I sat there after Daniel left the room, the folder open in front of me. The October light coming through the window. My father had been gone for 20 years. He had spent those 20 years still teaching me things. I thought about what it meant to notice someone, to really notice them, not as a category or a convenience, but as a person who mattered in their own right, to hold on to that noticing for 40 years and find a way to honor it. Mrs. Calloway had looked at an 8-year-old drawing of a backyard and seen something worth protecting. My father had looked at that and thought, she should know she changed something. I closed the folder carefully. Then I took out my phone and called the number Daniel had given me. It rang twice. Hello? A woman's voice, cautious, the wariness of someone who had recently received unexpected news and hadn't finished processing it. Hi, I said. My name is Eleanor Hargrove. I think your mother knew my father a long time ago. I was hoping we could talk. A pause. Then quietly, she talked about your father sometimes. She said he was one of the good ones. I pressed my lips together for a moment. He really was, I said. In November, 4 months after the divorce, Callum texted me. Not a call, a text which felt right, less intrusive, an ask rather than a claim. I know this is out of nowhere. There's something I want to say to you that I haven't said properly yet. Not about the legal stuff. That's done. Just something I need to say. Would you be willing to meet for 20 minutes? You can say no. I thought about it for a day. Then I wrote back, Crissy Field, Saturday the 14th, 10 in the morning. Crissy Field in November was quiet and wide and cold in the honest way San Francisco mornings were cold. Not brutal, but real. The kind of cold that required a coat and gave you the sky in exchange. The bay stretched out to the left, the bridge massive and rust-red ahead, the city at our backs. Callum was there when I arrived. Hands in his coat pockets, looking out at the water, he turned when he heard my footsteps on the path. Thanks for coming, he said. You said 20 minutes, I said. I'm holding you to that. He almost smiled. Fair. We started walking, side by side, not quite together, the way people walk when they're talking about something that requires looking at the middle distance rather than each other. I've been in therapy, he said after a moment, since August. I hadn't expected that. How's that going? It's uncomfortable, a pause. Apparently that means it's working. He was quiet for a few steps. I spent most of my life being very good at not feeling things while I was in the middle of them. Turns out that has a cost. I know, I said. I kept thinking about something you said after the hearing, that you didn't want to win anything. You just wanted it to be over. He walked a few more steps before continuing. I realized I didn't know how to think like that. Everything for me was about winning, the career, the cases, the everything, including our marriage toward the end. I had decided I deserved something better, and he stopped briefly. I never asked myself what I was actually losing. I listened to that. A dog ran past on the path, followed by a man in a bright yellow jacket who looked apologetically at us as he went. I should have fought for us, Callum said, years ago when things started going wrong. Instead, I withdrew, and I told myself it was inevitable, and eventually I made it inevitable. We both withdrew, I said, because it was true. I stopped telling you things that mattered. I stopped asking for things. I made it easy for you not to see me, because it felt safer than asking to be seen and being disappointed. That's not the same as what I did. No, I agreed. It's not. But it's true. We walked a little further without talking. The bridge ahead was beginning to disappear into the lower edge of the fog rolling in from the gate. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness, Callum said finally. I don't think I have the right to, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. Not just Jade, the whole thing, the years of it. The way I stopped treating you like someone whose life mattered as much as mine. I sat with that for a long moment. I hear you, I said. That's all I have the right to ask for, he said quietly. Yes, I said, it is. We reached the point where the path curved backward toward the parking area. By unspoken agreement, we both stopped. I hope your father's company does everything he wanted it to, Callum said. I think it will, I said. I'm going to make sure of it. He nodded. We stood there for a moment, two people who had shared 25 years and now shared nothing except the particular knowledge of each other that long marriages leave behind, tender and permanent as a scar. Take care of yourself, Callum. You too, Ellie. He turned and walked back the way we'd come. I stood and watched the fog take the bridge, the cables disappearing first, then the towers, until there was just the gray and the water and the sound of it. Then I turned and walked in the other direction. The last time someone calls you by a nickname that only they used, you never know it's the last time until later. He called me Ellie at the end. He hadn't called me that in years. I didn't say anything about it. Some things you just carry. There is a version of this story that ends with a number. $680 million, the final valuation of my 18% stake in Vantage Pacific, recorded in the filing, reported in the financial press, discussed at dinner parties I was not invited to by people I had never met who felt they knew something essential about my life because they had read a paragraph about it. That version of the story is not untrue. The number is real. The way it changed certain practical aspects of my life is real. But that version misses the thing that actually changed. I stopped asking permission, not from Callum. That relationship was over, and the dynamic that lived inside it was over with it. I mean, something older than that, more internal. The habit of checking myself against some imagined standard before deciding what I wanted. The reflexive self-diminishment that had become so natural I'd stopped recognizing it as a choice. I had been doing it since long before Callum. Since I was young enough to understand that wanting too much made people uncomfortable and that making people comfortable was safer than wanting. My father had seen it. He had written, I watched you make yourself smaller in a letter he knew I might not read for 20 years, and he had been right. And the fact that he was right and I hadn't known it about myself until I was 52 years old, sitting on a storage room floor with a manila envelope in my hands, that was the thing that changed. The money gave me options, but the letter gave me permission. Those are not the same thing at all. The idea for the foundation came from the simplest possible place. I was sitting in a board meeting at Vantage Pacific in October, my third board meeting, still finding my footing, when someone mentioned the company's existing charitable giving program. Standard corporate philanthropy, solid, competent, unmemorable. I thought about Mrs. Calloway writing a letter to my father in 1981. I thought about the 8-year-old drawing of a backyard and the woman with paint-stained fingers who had looked at it and decided it was worth a letter. I thought about all the children who had teachers like that and fathers who never got the letter. After the meeting, I pulled Daniel aside. I want to set up a foundation, I said, independent of the company, using a portion of my personal stake income. I have some ideas about what it should do. Daniel looked at me with the expression I had come to recognize as his version of enthusiasm, measured and professional but genuine. Tell me. The Franklin Hargrove Scholarship Fund was incorporated in January, 6 months after the divorce, 4 months after the IPO. Its focus was specific. First-generation college students in California, with a particular emphasis on students pursuing degrees in arts, humanities, and education. The fields that got cut first when money was tight. The fields that produced the teachers who wrote letters. The first cohort of recipients was announced in March. 47 students. I attended the award ceremony at a community college in Oakland and sat in the third row. I watched them file across a small stage in the gymnasium while a faculty member read their names and their planned fields of study. Nursing, computer science, education, social work, graphic design, history, theater. A girl named Amara Osei, 19 years old, the daughter of Ghanaian immigrants, planning to study education with a focus on arts integration, gave a short speech on behalf of the cohort. She was composed and direct and clearly terrified, which she managed with a dignity that made me think she was going to be a very good teacher someday. She said, I didn't know Franklin Hargrove. I looked him up when I got the letter. He built a software company in San Jose in the 1980s. He was quiet about it his whole life, but I'm standing here because of something he did quietly, decades before I was born, for a daughter he loved. She paused. I think that's what it means to invest in something, not just money. The decision to believe that what you're putting your resources toward is going to matter, even if you never see it. I looked down at my lap for a moment. When I looked up again, Amara had stepped back from the podium, and the next name was being called. I thought, Dad, you would have liked her. I thought, I'm going to make sure she has what she needs. In February, I received an email from the Dean of Academic Affairs at the University of Oxford, a visiting scholar program, a semester in residence, contributing to a research project on post-war American art and its transatlantic reception. They had read my third book. They were interested in whether I might be available in the coming academic year. I sat with the email for 3 days. On the first day, I thought about all the reasons it was complicated. My teaching commitments, the foundation's early operational period, the board responsibilities. On the second day, I thought about the kitchen table in our Mission District apartment in 2003. Callum's careful enumeration of the complications. My own careful decision to make them into reasons. On the third day, I called my department chair, Warren Obie, and asked about a leave of absence for the following spring semester. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Eleanor, I've been waiting for you to do something like this for about 15 years. Yes, absolutely yes. I wrote back to Oxford that afternoon. I would be very glad to accept. I should tell you, I was offered a fellowship at the Ruskin in 2003 and turned it down for reasons that seemed important at the time. I've thought about that decision more than I probably should have. I'm looking forward to finally showing up. The response came the next morning. We're delighted. And for what it's worth, the work you've done in the intervening years suggests the timing may have been exactly right. I read that line twice. Then I smiled, not at the flattery, but at the idea of timing. The way things arrive when they arrive and not before, and the question of whether that's loss or something else entirely. I still don't have a complete answer to that question, but I'm less troubled by not having it than I used to be. On a Friday evening in April, Miriam and I sat on the small balcony of my apartment with a bottle of wine and the bay spread out in front of us, impossibly beautiful in that unreasonable San Francisco way. We had been sitting in the kind of silence that only exists between people who have known each other long enough to not need to fill it. When Miriam said, out of nowhere, do you think you'll ever get married again? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not thinking about it. What do you think, Oxford? The foundation cohort review next month. Whether the plant on my windowsill is going to make it through the summer. The plant is definitely not going to make it through the summer. I know. I keep hoping. Miriam swirled her wine. Can I say something without you taking it the wrong way? You've never once led with that question when what followed wasn't something I needed to hear. Fair. She looked at me. You seem larger, like you're taking up the right amount of space again. I thought about that. Again implies I used to. You did. Before the marriage got heavy. In grad school, when we met, you'd walk into a room and just start talking about whatever you'd been thinking about. No preamble, no checking whether people were interested. You just assumed they would be. That sounds exhausting. It was magnetic. She said it plainly. You stopped doing it somewhere along the way. I noticed, but I didn't say anything because, what do you say? You just hope people find their way back. I looked at the bay. A container ship was moving slowly toward the bridge, lights strung along its length, improbable and enormous. My dad noticed too, I said. He wrote it in a letter. Smart man. He was. He'd be proud of you, Ellie. I felt the tenderness that came with that thought, not grief exactly, not anymore, but the particular feeling of missing someone who knew you well. I hope so, I said. I'm trying to be worth the trouble he went to. Miriam raised her glass to Franklin Hargrove. I raised mine to Franklin Hargrove. We drank. The ship moved under the bridge and disappeared into the darkness of the bay. The lights of the city came on behind us, one by one, the way they always did as the evening settled in, the hills going orange and then the deep blue of a San Francisco night. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in March, because I think it says something true about what actually matters. I was in my seminar room, the same room where I'd been discussing Hopper when the filing went public, the same fluorescent lights and temperamental projector and chairs that had absorbed 20 years of students. My Tuesday seminar, spring semester. 24 students. We were looking at Agnes Martin, the grids, the pale washes of color, the work that looked simple until you looked at it long enough for it to stop being simple. A student named Brandon, who sat in the second row and had the slightly challenging energy of someone very smart, still figuring out what to do with it, said, "I don't get it. It's just lines. Why does it matter that it's art?" It was a genuine question, the real thing underneath the challenging tone. I looked at the image on the screen. Agnes Martin's Friendship, 1963, gold leaf and graphite on canvas. The lines so fine they were almost invisible until the light hit them at exactly the right angle. "Come here," I said. Brandon looked slightly alarmed. He came to the front of the room. "Stand here." I positioned him about 4 feet from, what do you see? Lines. A grid, gold kind of. "Now step back, all the way to the back wall." He walked to the back of the room. 20 feet away, the individual lines dissolved into something that was less a grid and more an atmosphere, a quality of light, a feeling that was harder to name than lines. "Oh," Brandon said. "Most things that matter require you to find the right distance," I said. "Too close, and you see only the construction. Too far, and you miss the detail. The work is in finding where you can see both at once." The room was quiet. "Is that about art or something else?" asked a student named Priya from the front row, with the directness I had come to expect from her. "Yes," I said. The class laughed. Brandon walked back to his seat, looking thoughtful in the way students look when something has genuinely landed. I looked at the Martin on the screen. The quiet gold, the almost invisible lines, the painting that gave you nothing until you gave it something back. This is the thing, I thought. This is what I would have lost if I had stopped. Not the money, not the vindication, not even Oxford, this room. These students. The electricity of a moment when something becomes visible to someone who couldn't see it before. My father had wanted to protect this. He had spent 40 years making sure that whatever else happened, I would have a floor to stand on so this couldn't be taken from me. He understood what I valued better than I had for a long time, understood it myself. I moved the last of my things out of the Pacific Heights house on a Saturday in July. A year and 4 months after the night, Callum pulled up to the curb and didn't go into the garage. The new owners were a young family with a toddler who ran immediately for the stairs, with the focused determination of a small person who has identified a challenge worth attempting. They looked at the house the way people look at things they are going to love. I was glad. The house deserved people who would love it. My new apartment was smaller, and mine in a way the house had never quite been. I painted one wall in the living room a deep green, not a compromised color, not selected with someone else's taste in mind, just the color I wanted because I stood in the paint store, holding the sample card, and felt something uncomplicated and certain. I have a desk by the window where I write, bookshelves arranged in no particular order, the wooden pocket watch from my father's box vase sitting on the windowsill where I can see it from my desk, and the second letter framed on the wall near the door. The last two lines, "You were never too much, Ellie. You were exactly enough." I see it every time I leave in the morning. In September, I flew to London to begin the Oxford residency. The flight was long, and somewhere over Greenland at 4 in the morning, I took out a notebook and started writing, not about art history, not about the foundation or the IPO or any of the things that had happened in the past year and a half. Just writing. The way I used to write when I was young and had not yet learned to be careful about taking up space. I wrote about my father, about the storage room, about a third-grade teacher who had paint-stained fingers and saw something in a child's drawing and took the time to write a letter. I wrote about what it means to be seen. Really seen, not assessed, not evaluated, but actually seen, the full, complicated, particular truth of a person held in someone else's attention with care. I wrote for 3 hours. When I stopped, the sky outside the small oval window was beginning to lighten over the Atlantic. I closed the notebook and looked out at the approaching dawn. I was going to Oxford, 22 years late, and exactly on time. I heard through a mutual colleague in the spring, that Callum had started volunteering. Surgical missions to communities without access to specialist care, 3 or 4 times a year, using the skills that were genuinely extraordinary in service of people who had no other options. The colleague mentioned it simply, the way you mention things about people you've known a long time. I sat with that for a day. Then I thought, good. Not forgiving, not forgetting, not revising the story of what happened between us. Just good. A person using what is best about them in the world. That's worth something regardless of everything else. The complicated thing about people is that the same person can do something that marks you permanently and also do something genuinely worth admiring. Callum was both things. I had spent a long time trying to make him into only one of them. First, the admirable version, then, after everything, the lesser one. He was both. I was probably both things to him. Most people are both things to someone. You don't have to resolve the contradiction. You just have to decide what you're carrying forward and what you're leaving where it happened. I left the marriage where it happened. I carried forward what I learned from it, which was more than I expected and harder won than I would have chosen, and which turned out to be, in the way hard-won things often are, exactly sufficient. I'm 52 years old. I've been a professor for 20 years, a wife for 25, and a woman who found out the truth about her own life at the bottom of a cardboard box she'd been avoiding for 2 decades. Here's what I know. The money didn't make me stronger. I was already who I am before I opened that box. The money just made it harder for anyone to tell me otherwise. What actually changed me was a letter from a man who had been dead for 20 years, who looked back at his own life and called himself a coward for the one thing he'd gotten wrong, and who trusted me to understand the difference between being protected and being diminished. My father spent his whole life building something quietly. No announcements, no headlines, just work and care and the long patience of someone who believed that the right things, done consistently, eventually matter. I think about that when the board meetings get complicated, when the foundation work is slower than I'd like, when I'm standing in front of 24 students trying to explain why a painting that looks like nothing deserves 20 minutes of their full attention. The right things, done consistently. If you're in the middle of something right now that feels like lost men, I want to tell you something my father understood that took me 52 years to learn. The floor was always there. You built it in small ways over years, in every choice you made to keep going and keep being honest and keep showing up even when it cost you something. It was always there. You just needed the right moment to find out it could hold your weight. If this story meant something to you, if something in it landed somewhere real, I'd love to know. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me what you're carrying. Tell me what you're putting down. I read every one,